It was another scorching afternoon in the desert, the kind of day where heat waves shimmered across the sand and every soldier's boots felt like they were on fire. Dust clung to uniforms, weapons, and skin, but the platoon kept moving. Among them was Lieutenant Sarah Donovan, carrying a sniper rifle that looked more like an antique than a precision weapon. To the others, she seemed ordinary, just another face in the endless rotation of troops, another soldier blending into the world of fatigues, helmets, and sand. She had no outward aura of greatness, just a quiet, steady presence. Quick pause, comment where you're watching from. And if you love these stories, hit subscribe now. The next one will blow your mind, and it's even crazier. Sarah was on gate security duty at an outpost that had seen better days. Its sandbags sagged from weeks of relentless sun, and the metal watchtowers groaned when the wind kicked up. To the men around her, Sarah looked like a filler assignment, a soldier meant to be in the background. And her rifle, scarred from a convoy ambush months earlier, didn't inspire any confidence. The scope had a faint crack. The barrel was patched with fieldwork, and more than one soldier had joked that it belonged in a museum. But then, the impossible problem appeared. It started with the sharp sound of incoming fire. At first, just a single shot echoed from the ridges far beyond the base. Then came the thunder of machine gun bursts. Enemy combatants had positioned themselves nearly 2 kilometers away, using elevation and cover to pin the outpost down. Their rounds rattled against metal, tore into sandbags, and kept every soldier's head low. If they weren't stopped, the outpost could be overrun, and reinforcements would never arrive in time. The stakes were brutally clear. If they failed to stop the attackers, the outpost would fall. Dozens of soldiers could be wiped out before help came. Panic spread quickly. Men shouted orders, ducked for cover, and cursed under their breath. Some tried to return fire, but the distance was too great. Their rounds scattered uselessly in the sand. A few soldiers scoffed bitterly, muttering that they needed a Chris Kyle or Craig Harrison, legends of sniper warfare, not an under-equipped team sitting ducks in the desert. Eyes flicked to Sarah, then quickly dismissed her. Her rifle was too damaged, too unreliable. No one believed she could hit a target like that. Even Sarah herself felt the sting of doubt. She remembered her last failure, months ago when her squad had been ambushed on a supply run. She had missed a critical shot, and the memory of fallen comrades haunted her every night. That crack in her scope wasn't just physical. It was a scar etched deep in her confidence. For a moment, she wanted to sink down with the others, to hide behind the sandbags and let someone else be the hero. But then, Sarah stepped forward. Rising slowly, she set her rifle across the sandbag barricade. Dust clung to her gloves, her heart pounded, but her voice was steady when she finally spoke. "I've trained for this. I can make the shot." It wasn't arrogance. It was quiet determination. She had spent countless hours studying the legends. Carlos Hathcock, the Marine sniper who crawled for days to make a single kill. Craig Harrison, who had set records with impossible distances. And Chris Kyle, whose focus in chaos had saved lives. She didn't claim to be them, but their courage whispered through her as she steadied herself. The buildup began. Her hands checked the rifle, each motion deliberate. The scope, though cracked, still aligned enough for her to compensate. The barrel, though patched, still breathed with deadly potential. She adjusted the bipod into the sand, pressing it deep for stability. Her teammates watched, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others holding their breath. The environment itself seemed to tighten, heat shimmering, wind gusting lightly across the dunes, and silence falling in the spaces between gunfire. Her breath slowed. In, out, in, out. She felt the trigger beneath her finger. Time stretched painfully thin, each second dragging like an eternity. Her target was a distant silhouette on the ridge, moving between bursts of fire, nearly 2,000 yards away. A shot most called impossible. Then Sarah took the decisive action. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger gently, and the rifle cracked. For a moment there was only silence, the kind that gnaws at your insides. The bullet's flight was invisible, only measured in the agonizing weight. Then the target fell. One enemy silenced. She fired again. Another hit. Then another. Her cracked scope didn't matter. Her patched rifle didn't matter. Shot after shot rang out, each more precise than the last. The count grew. 3, 4, 5. Soldiers around her stopped firing and simply watched. 6, 7, 8. The ridge grew eerily quiet as enemies scrambled for cover. But Sarah tracked them, reading the wind, adjusting angles, never rushing. 9. And finally, the 10th shot landed true. The impossible streak was complete. 10 confirmed hits at 2,000 yards. The enemy fire stopped. The ridge was silent. The base, which had been moments from collapse, was saved by one soldier with a broken rifle and unbreakable focus. The crowd of soldiers erupted in shock. Some cheered, others stood frozen, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Their faces carried awe, relief, and disbelief all at once. The same soldiers who had doubted her now looked at Sarah as though she had stepped out of legend. But Sarah remained calm, lowering her rifle with a humble expression. She didn't boast, didn't smirk, didn't demand recognition. She simply whispered, "Someone had to." It was a line carried by humility, not pride. Later, as reinforcements secured the ridge and medics tended to the shaken but safe soldiers, whispers spread. They compared her to the legends she herself had studied, but they knew she had carved her own place among them. Sarah Donovan, the quiet lieutenant with the broken rifle, had saved the outpost when no one else could. The motivational takeaway was clear. Courage isn't about perfect weapons or flawless conditions. It's about stepping up when no one else will. It's about believing in yourself when others laugh and trusting your skills even when the odds are impossible. Sarah's shots weren't just bullets. They were proof that resilience, determination, and faith in one's own ability can break every limit. Because sometimes, the strongest warriors aren't the ones who look the part, but the ones who act when the world doubts them most. Private Emma Clark had never looked like the kind of soldier who would change the course of a battle. She was young, lean, and quiet, often overlooked in the lineup of hardened veterans around her. The rifle slung across her back looked older than she was, a battered sniper rifle with a faint crack along the scope and scratches etched into the wood. To the others it was a joke, a relic. To Emma it was her inheritance. The rifle had once belonged to her father, a decorated marksman who had passed it to her before his final deployment. She carried it not for pride but for memory. On the base, she blended in. She followed orders, kept her head down, and looked like just another ordinary soldier in a European war zone where the lines shifted like shadows. But beneath that calm exterior, Emma carried the weight of expectation. Her father's name had been spoken with respect in military circles, his reputation tied to legendary precision. Now with the rifle in her hands, the soldiers around her whispered comparisons, most of them unflattering. They joked she wasn't cut out to follow in his footsteps. The crisis struck without warning. The platoon was moving through a ruined village when the first shot rang out, splintering brick from the wall above them. Then another. Snipers, entrenched far beyond the ruined rooftops, had pinned them down. Machine gun fire followed, forcing the squad into cover as bullets carved into stone and dirt. The enemy had the advantage of elevation and concealment, and every attempt to push forward was met with precise, deadly counterfire. The situation was dire. If the squad didn't eliminate the hidden sharpshooters, they would be trapped, and reinforcements couldn't reach them in time. The consequences were unthinkable: capture, destruction, and the end of their mission. Panic spread. Soldiers cursed as they pressed against walls, their rifles useless against targets too distant to see. Some muttered in disbelief, saying only a Carlos Hathcock or a Billy Singh could make those shots, men whose names were immortalized in sniper lore. Others looked around desperately for an answer, but hope drained quickly in the hail of bullets. Emma felt the sting of those doubts, not just from the others, but from deep inside herself. She remembered the last time she had taken a long-distance shot in training. Her hands had shaken, the round had flown wide, and her instructor's silence had said more than words ever could. Since then, she had lived in the shadow of failure, haunted by the belief that she wasn't enough. But as her squad huddled under fire, the memories of her father came back. his patient voice teaching her to breathe with the rifle, to trust the process, to block out the noise. She felt his lessons stirring in her chest, and for the first time since his passing, she stepped forward. "I can do it," Emma said quietly, lifting the rifle into place. The others turned, some in disbelief, some in outright dismissal. The weapon looked ridiculous compared to their modern gear. But Emma didn't flinch. She spoke with a steadiness that surprised even herself. "I've trained for this. My father's rifle is still good enough. It wasn't arrogance. It was quiet determination." The build-up began. She crawled forward, pressing her chest into the rubble-strewn street until she found a vantage point where the rooftops came into view. Her fingers brushed over the old rifle, checking it with deliberate precision. The scope was cracked, but she had learned to compensate by instinct, shifting her eyes slightly to align with the distortion. She set the bipod into the dirt, dug her elbows in for stability, and listened. The world around her slowed. Gunfire echoed in sharp bursts. Dust rose with every impact around the squad. The wind was light, pulling slightly to the east, carrying the faint smell of smoke. Emma calculated quickly, breathing steadily as she scanned the ridges and rooftops. There, movement. A flash of sunlight off metal. Her first target revealed itself. Her breath slowed. One inhale, one exhale. Time stretched thin, every second dragging long enough to feel like an eternity. The trigger tightened under her finger. Then she fired. The crack of the rifle echoed, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the figure on the rooftop collapsed, sliding out of sight. "One down!" The squad froze, eyes snapping toward Emma. No one spoke. She didn't pause. Her father's lessons whispered through her mind. Trust the process. Steady the breath. See only the shot. She shifted her sights, scanning for the next glint of movement. Another enemy shifting between cover. She fired again. Another hit. The count grew. 3, 4, 5. Each shot carried the same impossible distance, nearly 2,000 yards, well beyond what most soldiers believed achievable with her weapon. Yet each round found its mark, as if guided by something more than steel and powder. By the 6th shot, disbelief turned to awe. Soldiers who had mocked her rifle now lowered their weapons, watching silently as Emma worked. By the 7th, a hush fell, broken only by the echo of her shots across the ruins. By the 8th, hope began to bloom where fear had been. 9, and then, with the calm of a surgeon, she squeezed the trigger one last time. The 10th round flew, silent in its invisible arc, and struck true. The ridges fell silent. The enemy's fire ceased completely. The rooftops that had once reigned, death now lay still. Cleared by a soldier no one had believed in. The squad erupted, some shouting in relief, others simply staring at her as though they had witnessed something impossible. Their faces carried awe, gratitude, and a hint of shame for the doubts they had carried moments before. Emma lowered her rifle, her chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate, didn't seek glory. She simply whispered, "I trusted myself." Her words carried more weight than any victory cry could have. As the squad regrouped and pushed forward, the whispers began. They spoke her name alongside the greats, Hathcock, Singh, Hathaway, yet with a reverence of its own. They realized they hadn't just seen history repeated. They had witnessed it being rewritten. The motivational takeaway was clear. Courage isn't about perfection. It isn't about having the newest tools or the best reputation. Courage is about stepping into the line of fire when no one else will. It's about believing in yourself when doubt surrounds you and proving that the impossible can be broken down one steady breath at a time. Private Emma Clark had entered the village as just another soldier. Mocked for carrying her father's broken rifle, she left it as a legend in her own right, proof that legacy isn't just inherited, but earned with courage, responsibility, and the unshakable belief that limits exist only to be shattered. The desert stretched endlessly under the relentless sun, a sea of golden dunes broken only by jagged cliffs and scattered stone ridges. Heat shimmered in the air, twisting the horizon into mirages. At a forward operating base on the edge of this unforgiving landscape, Sergeant Rachel Hayes stood guard with her squad, her eyes scanning the distance. She wasn't a soldier who drew attention. In the mess hall, she sat quietly, eating without fanfare. On patrols, she carried herself with steady efficiency, never loud, never boastful. Her sniper rifle, however, was the one thing that drew sideways glances. Months earlier, it had been damaged during a convoy ambush. The armorer had done his best with field repairs. New parts here, some welding there, but everyone knew the rifle was far from perfect. Its barrel carried patched scars, its scope had alignment issues, and it looked like a weapon that had already fought too many battles. Other soldiers sometimes joked about it. They called it Frankenstein's rifle, a relic unworthy of a marksman. And when they compared Rachel to legends like Simo Häyhä, the Finnish sniper nicknamed White Death, or Adalbert Waldron, the U.S. marksman who held record kills in Vietnam, the comparison always ended with a shake of the head. She was competent, yes, but no one expected greatness. Then came the siege. It started just after dawn. The first warning was a dull boom in the distance, followed by the whistle of incoming mortar fire. The base shook as explosions erupted at the perimeter, spraying sand and debris into the air. Before anyone could recover, the rattle of machine guns thundered from the ridges. Enemy forces had taken position high above, their weapons trained with ruthless precision. Bullets ripped into sandbags, tore through supply tents, and forced soldiers into cover. The outpost was caught in a vice. If the ridge wasn't cleared, the enemy would have a perfect angle to pound them into dust. Reinforcements were too far away. The squad's survival depended entirely on whether someone could stop the attackers. The stakes were brutal. Fail, and the base would fall. Panic spread through the defenders. Shouts of fear and disbelief echoed as soldiers tried to return fire, but their rifles couldn't match the distance. The enemies were positioned nearly 2 kilometers away, too far for ordinary weapons. Some cursed openly, comparing the situation to a death trap. Others muttered names of legendary snipers, saying only a Häyhä or a Waldron could save them now. Doubt hung heavy in the air. Rachel felt it too. She crouched behind the sandbags, the sting of memory flooding back. She thought of the ambush months earlier, the one where her rifle had been damaged. She had taken a shot that day and missed, and the memory of comrades lost in the firefight haunted her every time she looked at the patched weapon. The crack in the barrel wasn't just metal, it was a fracture in her own confidence. For a moment, she considered staying down, letting someone else attempt the impossible. But then a soldier next to her cried out in pain as a bullet grazed his arm. Another shouted that they couldn't hold out much longer. Rachel felt something shift inside her. Fear was still there, but stronger than fear was responsibility. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped forward. Her voice was steady, though the storm around her was anything but. "I can do this," she said, lifting the scarred rifle onto the sandbags. Some soldiers turned in disbelief. Others shook their heads. One muttered, "That thing won't hit a barn door at this distance." But Rachel didn't answer. She wasn't making a boast, just a promise to herself. The buildup began. She lowered herself into position, her cheek resting against the worn stock of the rifle. Every movement was precise, deliberate. Her hands checked the scope, compensating for its slight misalignment. She adjusted the bipod deep into the sand, anchoring the rifle like roots digging into the earth. The ridges stretched far away, jagged shadows against the morning sun. Wind whipped across the desert carrying heat and dust. She factored it all in, the distance, the crosswinds, the shimmer of rising air. Her breathing slowed. In, out, in, out. Around her, chaos raged. Machine guns chattered. Mortars thumped. Soldiers shouted. But inside her focus there was silence. Time stretched, every second drawn into a taut string. Then she saw him. A gunner perched on the ridge, his weapon spitting fire at her squad, nearly 2,000 yards away. An impossible shot, most would say. But Rachel didn't listen to impossible. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger gently, and the rifle cracked. For an instant, nothing. Then the enemy gunner collapsed, his weapon falling silent. The squad froze. Eyes turned toward her. Rachel adjusted. Another target revealed itself, Ducking between cover, she fired. Another hit. 3, 4, 5. Each shot a dance of physics and instinct, her cracked scope and patched barrel no longer limitations, but extensions of her will. By the 6th shot, disbelief turned to awe. Soldiers who had doubted her stopped speaking altogether, their gazes fixed on the impossible unfolding before them. By the 7th, the rhythm of her breathing and firing felt like a heartbeat echoing through the base. By the 8th, even the enemy seemed to falter, their fire slowing as panic spread through their ranks. 9. Rachel steadied herself for the final shot. She adjusted for the wind, the shimmer, the weight of the moment. The world seemed to hold its breath with her. Then she squeezed the trigger one last time. The 10th round struck true. The ridge fell silent. Enemy fire ceased. The desert, once alive with chaos, now echoed with nothing but the wind. The siege had been broken by one soldier with a broken rifle. The crowd reacted in shock. Soldiers shouted in relief, some laughing with disbelief, others staring at Rachel as though they had seen a miracle. A medic clapped her on the shoulder. Another soldier whispered, "She just saved us all." Rachel lowered her rifle slowly, her expression calm. She didn't smile, didn't revel in the victory. Her voice was quiet, humble. When she finally spoke, someone had to. It was not pride, but truth. Later, as reinforcements secured the ridge and the wounded were tended to, the story began to spread. Soldiers compared what they had witnessed to the feats of Simo Häyhä and Adalbert Waldron, names etched in history. But they knew this was no copy of the past. It was something new. A soldier with a damaged weapon had stood against impossible odds and carved her own legend into the desert. The motivational takeaway was clear. Bravery isn't about having the perfect tools or being free of fear. It's about stepping forward when no one else dares, about trusting your training and your instincts even when everything seems broken. Sergeant Rachel Hayes proved that courage is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to act despite it. Her rifle may have been patched and scarred, but her spirit was unbreakable. And in the silence after the battle, the lesson lingered for everyone who had witnessed it. True strength isn't found in the weapon you hold, but in the will that drives you to pull the trigger when it matters most. The desert wind howled like an unseen enemy, carrying dust that stung the skin and blurred the horizon. In the middle of that harsh landscape stood a small joint outpost, manned by both UK and US soldiers. Among them was Corporal Megan Walker, a British sniper assigned temporarily to a Marine unit. To most, she was just another soldier, quiet, diligent, blending into the routine of guard shifts and patrols. Nothing about her outwardly declared greatness. Her rifle, however, drew attention. It was patched together from parts salvaged after an ambush, the stock cracked and sanded down, the scope with a faint spiderweb fracture running across its glass. Soldiers joked about it behind her back. Some even laughed openly, calling it a museum piece or scrap metal with a trigger. And when they compared her to legends like Chris Kyle, Craig Harrison, or Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the names whispered with reverence in sniper circles. The jokes became sharper. "She'll never measure up." Megan didn't respond to the jibes. She simply checked her rifle every morning, cleaning it with the care of a surgeon. For her, the weapon wasn't about prestige. It was about duty. She had chosen to carry it not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. And it had carried her through battles before. The storm of mockery would soon give way to a storm of bullets. It began on a late afternoon patrol. The sun was sinking, casting the desert in deep shades of gold and red. Megan's squad was moving through a valley when the first burst of gunfire erupted from the ridges. The enemy had prepared an ambush, their weapons trained down on the narrow pass. Sand exploded at their feet as rounds tore into the ground, forcing the soldiers into cover behind boulders. The trap was perfect. The attackers had distance, height, and concealment. To fight back with ordinary rifles was suicide. The only way out was to silence the enemy gunners before they wiped out the squad. The stakes couldn't have been clearer. Fail here, and the entire patrol would be slaughtered. Panic spread through the ranks. Some Marines cursed, others shouted into radios for support that was hours away. A few scoffed bitterly, muttering that no one could hit targets from this far. One soldier sneered, "Unless Chris Kyle's ghost is here, we're done." Another shook his head and glanced at Megan's rifle. "Not with that thing," the words stung. Megan felt the weight of them settle on her shoulders, dragging her back into memories of past battles where her skills had been doubted. She remembered freezing during a critical moment years ago when hesitation had cost lives. The shame of that moment had never fully left her, and now it echoed in the voices around her. For a heartbeat, she wanted to stay down, to let someone else try. But then she looked at her squad, soldiers bleeding, frightened, yet holding the line. If no one acted, they were lost. She drew in a breath, steadying herself against the noise of fear. "I'll take the shot," Megan said quietly, setting her rifle on the rock in front of her. Laughter mixed with disbelief. "With that busted rifle?" one Marine said, shaking his head. Another muttered, "We're dead." But Megan didn't rise to their doubts. Her words had not been a boast, they were a promise to herself. The build-up began. She slid into position, pressing her cheek against the cracked stock. Her fingers adjusted the scope, compensating for the fractured glass. She set her bipod firmly into the sand, digging it in for stability. The desert was alive with tension. The wind cut across the valley, the sun dipped lower, and every second brought another hail of enemy fire. Her breathing slowed. Inhale. Exhale. The chaos around her faded until all that remained was the rifle and the distant ridge. Through the fractured lens, she spotted movement. An enemy gunner perched high, muzzle flashing with each burst. Nearly 2,000 yards away. She steadied her breath, squeezed the trigger, and the rifle roared. For an instant, the desert held its breath. Then the target fell, tumbling from the ridge. One enemy silenced. The squad froze. The soldier who had mocked her rifle blinked in shock. Megan adjusted her aim. Another enemy revealed himself, ducking between rocks. She fired again. Another hit. 3, 4, 5. The shots came with methodical calm, each one a dance between instinct and precision. The cracked scope didn't matter. The patched barrel didn't matter. What mattered was her steady hand and her unwavering focus. By the 6th shot, disbelief had turned into awe. Marines who had scoffed now stared in silence, watching her rifle sing with impossible accuracy. By the 7th, whispers of hope spread among them. By the 8th, the enemy's fire began to falter as panic rippled through their lines. 9. Megan steadied herself for the final shot. The wind shifted slightly. The light dimmed as the sun dropped lower, but her focus never wavered. She adjusted her aim, inhaled, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger one last time. The 10th target fell. Silence followed. The ridges, once alive with gunfire, were now still. The ambush had been broken by one soldier with a broken rifle. The squad reacted with shock and relief. Some laughed, half-crazed from the adrenaline. Others clapped her shoulder, their earlier doubts washed away in awe. The Marine who had mocked her weapon the loudest muttered under his breath, "I'll never doubt that rifle again." Megan lowered her weapon, her face calm, her breath steady. She didn't smile, didn't boast, didn't demand recognition. She simply said, "It had to be done." Her words were humble, but they carried the weight of truth. Later, as reinforcements secured the valley and the squad regrouped, the story began to spread. Soldiers compared what they had seen to the legends, Kyle, Harrison, Pavlichenko, yet they knew this wasn't just a retelling of history. It was something new. A soldier mocked for her weapon had stood against impossible odds and carved her own name into the annals of courage. The motivational takeaway was undeniable. Greatness doesn't come from flawless tools or perfect conditions. It comes from resilience, from the refusal to bow to doubt, and from the courage to act when the world says you cannot. Corporal Megan Walker had entered the valley as the soldier with a broken rifle. She left it as the sandstorm sniper, a living reminder that the line between defeat and victory is drawn not by weapons, but by will. And for every soldier who had witnessed her stand, the lesson was etched deep into memory. Courage isn't loud, it isn't boastful. Courage is quiet, steady and unshakable even in the face of mockery.